For decades, Arizona represented one of America's biggest success stories. Rapid population growth, expanding cities, booming housing markets, endless development. People move for opportunity, sunshine, and affordability. Entire communities were built around the idea that growth would continue indefinitely, and for a long time, it did. But rapid growth always carries hidden risks, because when expansion happens too quickly, systems begin to strain. Infrastructure struggles to keep up. Costs rise, resources tighten, and eventually, the very growth that once created opportunity can begin creating pressure. Across Arizona, small warning signs are beginning to appear. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, but clear signals that rapid expansion may be creating long-term challenges. These warning signs don't mean Arizona is collapsing, but they do suggest that its growth model may be facing limits. Here are 7 warning signs that Arizona's growth is starting to backfire. For years, affordable housing was Arizona's biggest advantage. People moved from expensive states because they could buy larger homes for less money. Families could build stability. Retirees could stretch savings. But that advantage is fading. Home prices in major cities like Phoenix have risen dramatically. Rents have surged. Property taxes and maintenance costs continue increasing. What was once accessible is becoming difficult. Rapid population growth created massive demand. Developers built quickly, but demand grew even faster. When supply struggles to match growth, prices rise, and rising housing costs create ripple effects. Young buyers struggle to enter the market. Renters spend larger portions of income on housing. Workers face longer commutes from cheaper areas. When affordability disappears, one of the biggest reasons people move to a place disappears too. Rapid growth requires rapid expansion of infrastructure. New residents need roads, schools, hospitals, water systems, power supply. But infrastructure takes years to build. Population growth often moves faster. This creates pressure on public systems. Traffic congestion increases. Roads experience heavy wear. Public services become stretched. Cities must invest billions simply to maintain existing service levels. Residents experience this daily. Longer commutes, crowded public spaces, strained services. When infrastructure constantly struggles to keep up, quality of life gradually declines. Arizona has always been hot, but rising temperatures are making extreme heat more intense and more frequent. This affects more than comfort. Extreme heat changes how cities function. Outdoor activity becomes limited. Energy consumption increases. Cooling costs rise. Infrastructure also faces stress. Road surfaces expand and crack. Power demand reaches extreme peaks. Equipment experiences greater wear. Heat changes how people experience everyday life. Public spaces become less usable. Walkability decreases. Communities shift indoors. Over time, environmental pressure reshapes how desirable a place feels to live. Water has always been central to life in the Southwest. Arizona depends heavily on complex water systems, including the Colorado River and underground reserves. But long-term water availability is becoming less predictable. Population growth increases demand. Environmental conditions affect supply. Legal agreements between states add complexity. Even the perception of future shortages influences behavior. Developers consider long-term sustainability. Investors evaluate risk. Homeowners worry about future value. Water security becomes not just an environmental issue, but an economic one. And economic uncertainty changes migration patterns. Housing isn't the only expense increasing. Rapid growth pushes up costs across the entire economy. Groceries, utilities, transportation, healthcare, insurance. Urban expansion creates longer distances between homes and workplaces. Residents rely more heavily on cars. This increases fuel costs and maintenance expenses. Growth can stimulate economic activity, but it also raises prices. When everyday life becomes more expensive, residents begin comparing alternatives, and comparison drives relocation. As environmental and infrastructure risks grow, insurance companies adjust pricing. Higher risk leads to higher premiums. Insurance affects home ownership costs, business operating expenses, investment decisions. Mortgage lenders also evaluate long-term risk. If insurance becomes expensive or difficult to obtain, access to housing becomes harder. Financial risk doesn't always create immediate crisis, but it quietly reshapes economic behavior over time. Perhaps the most important warning sign is changing expectations. People today prioritize different factors when choosing where to live: climate stability, cost of living, work flexibility, environmental sustainability, lifestyle balance. Remote work allows individuals to choose location based on preference rather than necessity. This increases competition between regions. If a place no longer offers clear advantages, people move elsewhere. Growth depends not just on opportunity, but on perception of long-term livability, and perception can shift quickly. Each of these issues may seem manageable on its own, but together they create structural pressure: rising costs, environmental challenges, infrastructure strain, changing expectations. These forces interact with each other. Growth increases demand. Demand increases costs. Costs influence migration. Migration reshapes development. This cycle determines the long-term trajectory of cities. Arizona has overcome challenges before. The state has invested in infrastructure, managed growth, and expanded opportunity. Adaptation is possible. Cities can redesign urban spaces. Technology can improve resource efficiency. Policies can manage development. But adaptation requires planning, investment, and long-term strategy. Rapid growth alone does not guarantee sustainability. Arizona's situation raises a much bigger question, not just about one state, not just about one region, but about the future of modern growth itself. Because for most of the last century, expansion has been treated as inevitable. Cities grow, populations increase, development spreads outward. Growth became the default assumption. Entire economic systems depend on that assumption. Housing markets rely on constant demand. Infrastructure planning assumes rising populations. Businesses invest, expecting expansion. But what happens when growth begins to face natural limits? What happens when expansion meets environmental reality? For decades, the American Southwest represented possibility. Open land, rapid development, affordable living, space to expand. Arizona symbolized that promise. A place where people could start over, build a future, find opportunity. The desert was transformed into modern cities through engineering, planning, and investment. Water systems were built. Communities expanded. Entire economies emerged. It was one of the most ambitious urban development stories in modern history. But every system, no matter how advanced, operates within limits. And the challenge of the 21st century is learning where those limits are. The pressures facing Arizona today are not sudden. They are the result of decades of decisions. Decisions about development, about resource use, about infrastructure design, about long-term planning. When growth happens rapidly, long-term consequences often appear slowly. At first, expansion feels effortless. New homes are built. New residents arrive. Economic activity increases. But over time, complexity grows. Systems become harder to maintain. Costs increase. Risks accumulate. This is not failure. It is the natural outcome of rapid success. What makes Arizona important is that it may represent a preview of challenges other fast-growing regions will eventually face. Around the world, cities are expanding into environments that require careful management. Extreme climates, limited water resources, high energy demand, rapid population growth. These conditions require constant adaptation, and they force societies to ask difficult questions. How much growth is sustainable? How should resources be managed? How should cities evolve? Arizona is part of this global conversation. There is also a psychological dimension to growth. For generations, people believed certain places would always become more desirable over time. Property values would rise, demand would increase, opportunity would expand. That belief created powerful momentum. But when confidence changes, behavior changes. and confidence can shift gradually. A single concern rarely changes migration patterns, but multiple concerns, building slowly, can reshape expectations. When expectations change, entire markets adjust. Investment slows, demand stabilizes, growth becomes uncertain, and uncertainty transforms decision-making. This is why perception matters. Even the possibility of future constraints influences present behavior. Home buyers think about long-term value. Businesses think about future stability. Families think about quality of life. People plan decades ahead. And when planning horizons extend far into the future, small risks become significant. The idea of sustainability becomes central. Technology may provide solutions. Advances in water management, energy efficiency improvements, urban cooling strategies, smarter infrastructure systems. Innovation has solved major challenges before. Human societies are highly adaptable, but adaptation requires investment, coordination, and long-term planning. And the scale of modern cities makes change complex. Infrastructure cannot be transformed overnight. Urban systems evolve slowly. Another important factor is demographic change. Younger generations often prioritize different things than previous ones. Walkable cities, environmental stability, affordable living, flexible work opportunities. Preferences evolve over time, and when preferences change, migration patterns follow. The places that attract people today may not attract them tomorrow. Regions must continuously adapt to remain competitive. The rise of remote work has accelerated this transformation. For the first time in modern history, millions of people can choose where they live, independent of where they work. This creates a new dynamic. States and cities now compete globally for residents. Quality of life becomes a primary factor. Climate stability matters more. Affordability matters more. Long-term sustainability matters more. This competition reshapes population distribution, and it increases the importance of long-term planning. Arizona's growth story was built during a different era, an era when mobility was lower, when options were fewer, when development pressures were different. Today, the environment has changed. People have more information, more flexibility, more choices, which means regions must work harder to maintain growth. Attracting residents is no longer enough. They must also retain them. The warning signs we discussed throughout this video represent early signals of structural pressure, not immediate crisis, not sudden collapse, but indicators that systems are approaching important thresholds, and thresholds matter, because once systems pass certain points, change accelerates, costs rise faster, adaptation becomes harder, decisions become more urgent. Recognizing pressure early allows for gradual adjustment. Ignoring pressure leads to sudden disruption. This is why urban planning is so important. Cities are long-term projects. Decisions made today shape conditions decades into the future. Infrastructure built now will exist for generations. Development patterns are difficult to reverse. Planning must consider not just present needs, but future realities. There is also an economic dimension. Population growth drives tax revenue. Tax revenue funds infrastructure. Infrastructure supports economic activity. When growth slows, this cycle becomes more fragile. Governments must adjust budgets. Services must be reevaluated. Priorities must shift. These changes affect daily life in subtle ways. But uncertainty does not mean decline. It means transition. Regions throughout history have faced moments of transformation. Some adapted successfully. Others struggled. The difference was preparation. The willingness to recognize change early. The ability to respond strategically. Arizona's future will depend on how effectively it navigates this transition. It is also important to remember that growth alone is not the ultimate measure of success. Sustainability matters. Stability matters. Resilience matters. A smaller but stable population can be stronger than rapid but fragile expansion. Long-term prosperity depends on balance. Balancing development with resources, balancing opportunity with livability, balancing growth with sustainability. The challenges facing Arizona highlight a broader shift in how societies think about development. The question is no longer simply, how fast can we grow? But instead, how well can we sustain that growth? This change in mindset may define the future of urban planning worldwide. In many ways, Arizona stands at a crossroads. One path continues rapid expansion without significant adjustment. Another path emphasizes sustainability, adaptation, and long-term planning. The direction chosen will shape the state for generations, and the outcome will influence how other regions approach similar challenges. Because what happens in one place rarely stays isolated. Economic trends spread. Migration patterns influence other states. Policy decisions set precedents. Arizona's experience may become a model, either as a warning or as an example of successful adaptation. Ultimately, the future is not predetermined. The pressures are real, but so is the capacity for innovation. Human societies have repeatedly overcome complex challenges. Cities evolve, technologies improve, policies adapt. The story is still unfolding. What matters most is awareness. Understanding the forces shaping change allows individuals, businesses, and governments to make better decisions. It allows communities to prepare. It allows systems to adapt gradually rather than react suddenly. And preparation determines long-term outcomes. Arizona's growth transformed the desert into one of America's most dynamic regions. Its next chapter will determine whether that growth can be sustained for the future. And that question, how we balance expansion with limits, may become one of the defining challenges of our time, because the places that thrive in the future will not simply be those that grow the fastest. They will be the ones that adapt the smartest. They will be the ones that plan the longest. They will be the ones that recognize change and respond before it is too late. Arizona's story is still being written, and what happens next will shape not only the future of the state, but the future of how modern cities grow. If you found this analysis valuable, consider subscribing for more deep dives into population shifts, economic trends, and the forces reshaping where people live. Because understanding these changes helps us understand the future, not just of Arizona, but of growth itself.